Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Michael, here we are. It is now May 9th, 2025. So many things have happened since the last time you and I had a podcast. Kathy and I went to Portugal for a little over 2 weeks. I want to talk a little bit about that and how it relates to what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
And then I want to talk a little bit about, once again, setting up today, talking about our Constitutional Convention. And then we've had a conclave, and we have a new pope.
Well, you and I haven't had a conclave, but the world has had a conclave.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
You and I should have one sometime.
The Catholics have had a conclave. You and I may go to lunch one day and have our own. But at any rate, Kathy and I went to Portugal, and I don't know. Before I went to Portugal, I didn't know much about Portugal and didn't know much about its history. Didn't know how its political system worked. And we had a person who took us around on a couple of tours, who really did know the history of Portugal, how their government worked from the standpoint of elections and one thing or another. So it was fascinating. He also took me to this place that's it's in a public area near the canal that comes from the ocean into Lisbon. And there's a map on the ground that's about 100 feet by 100 feet of the world. Mm. And you have these cities and you have dates, and the dates are all around 1500. And those are the dates where the Portuguese discovered those various places. And what's interesting is, and this is a part I was completely unaware, Portugal and Spain were the only two countries around 1500 that had sea captains who could navigate by the stars. And if you couldn't navigate by the stars, you would die. If once you went to sea and lost sight of land,
right,
you didn't have any idea which direction you were going, and you would die. And a lot of them died anyway, even if they could navigate by the stars. But because they could navigate by the stars, they could keep going in the same direction. And therefore, if you keep going in the same direction long enough in this world, you would bump into another piece of land. And that's what they did. But there was one part in there that was fascinating. There was a line that went straight down the western side of Brazil. And it went up the east coast of the United States. It didn't go into the land, just up the east coast. And I said, "What is that?" And the guy says, "Well, the King of Portugal and the King of Spain decided to divide the world in half because they were the ones doing all the discovering. And rather than fight over the discoveries, they divided it in half. And to the right of that would be Portugal up to the next line, which was half a world away.
Yes.
And then to the other side of it would be Spain. And that's why Brazil speaks Portuguese, and the western half of South America speaks Spanish, and Mexico speaks Spanish. That's just
It's very interesting. And if you put this in historical context, Columbus came in 1492. It's just at the beginning of what you're describing. He was Italian, sponsored by the Spanish.
Yes. Yes.
And so the English didn't come until the 1600s,
right.
Jamestown and all that, and then the settlement of the U.S., 16 and 1700. So that particular time, it was all about Spain and Portugal.
Yes, yeah, and Lisbon was the first major port that you would come into if you were coming from the Far East around Africa and up to Europe.
Yeah.
And so Lisbon was a very, very prosperous city for that reason. And then when the Suez Canal was opened, the importance of Lisbon diminished. It didn't go away, but it diminished.
And Suez was what, up in the 1800s, maybe?
Yes, but I mean, so
about 300 years.
Yes, and so it's just interesting how things change. But I asked my guide. I said, "Tell me about the politics of Portugal," because as we were going around, there were billboards promoting a particular one candidate or another. And I said, "What's all this about?" He said, "Well, we have our parliamentary elections on May 18th." And so that's what all that's about. I said, "Well, how's your government elected, and how does it work?" And he said, "Well, we're a parliamentary system. We were a dictatorship until 1974. And also Liberation Day, the annual Liberation Day, took place while we were there. And that's when the dictator was overthrown in 1974 by the military.
Okay.
And they then became a parliamentary form of government. And they have about 5 political parties. No political party has much more than 30%. The party that he likes has about 20%. So it was the third most popular. And so if you win 30% of the votes, and that's the most of anybody, then you have an opportunity to form a coalition government. And so what you do is you then go appeal to, say, the party that got 22% of the vote. And if you can form a coalition government, your 30 plus 50 plus 22 gets you to 52% of the parliament.
Whatever it takes to get over 50% and then, can form a government.
Right, to form the government. And then that group, now the head of the party with 30% is now the prime minister, the head of the government. But then the government lasts so long as that coalition sticks together.
Yes.
So they've had like 3 elections in the last 5 years.
Because the governments keep falling.
Government keeps falling apart.
Somebody falls out of bed with somebody else.
Right.
There's an important point here about the virtues of the two-party system.
Yes.
Because a lot of people in our country hate it.
Yeah.
And they think it reduces everything to, black and white, and you don't have enough choice.
Yeah.
The way I like to say this is that a two-party system forces choices before the election.
Mm-hmm.
You have to form coalitions before the election, get behind one or the other candidate. If you don't do that, you have an unstable government. We have governments that last 4 years.
Yes.
By definition, unless somebody is impeached, and even the same party stays in power. Right? In parliamentary systems, you have to make these choices after the election, which is not necessarily great.
Right.
It has its weaknesses.
Yeah. So in their system, they don't move much. Well, a few years ago,
what does that mean? They don't move. They don't change.
The government doesn't change much.
Okay.
Because you don't have as in a two-party system. When Trump ran for office, whether you like him or not, when Trump ran for office, he made certain promises of these. This is what he will do. And he's doing what he said he would do.
Right.
That's what politicians in a two-party system, frankly, to me, they have a moral obligation.
To change?
To tell the voters what they're going
to do. And
then do what they promise.
Right.
Now, but in a parliamentary system, it doesn't really work that way because you don't get one party rarely gets a majority. So consequently, over the years since 1974, you have this parliamentary system that leans toward government getting bigger and bigger over time. And that was true in Greece. It was true in Spain. It was true in Italy. They all had essentially the same dynamics at work. And they grew, their governments grew to where they were spending 7 to 8% deficit spending as a percentage of their GDP. The Eurozone, if you're going to be on the Euro, which Portugal was part of the Eurozone, says that you cannot spend more than 2%.
And the reason they say that is that the other governments end up paying those bills. If they're unified, then Germany's got to pay it off, or your indiscipline, lack of discipline in Greece or whatever is going to cost the other countries to fix it.
Yeah,
and they're not going to tolerate it.
That's right. You can export your inflation to the other countries.
Right.
Well, the other countries then told these 4 countries, which were nicknamed the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. That's what they were nicknamed.
What a great acronym.
Well, yeah. That's what they were nicknamed, and they were spending too much. And so the Euros went to those people, those governments, and said, you must get to 2% or we are going to kick you out of the Eurozone. Well, they recognized that if they got kicked out of the Eurozone, inflation would go crazy in their own countries. And so they were now forced, all of the parties of the coalition were forced to sit down at a table and agree on what spending would be cut to get down to the 2%. And that is similar to our Constitutional Convention, where our Constitutional Convention, everybody who was attending the convention, the one thing they did agree on was that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient and that they must either amend them or replace them in a significant way.
So just to look back, we've talked about this in prior podcasts, but the Articles of Confederation had been set up to run the U.S. government. They had a war, and they couldn't pay their bills.
Right.
And it was inadequate to get the state, didn't have enough power to compel the states to raise the money to pay the war debt.
And there were many other issues.
Many other problems. That was a big one. And so they formed a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. They decided in the convention to replace it.
Yeah, with the Constitution.
Right.
But the point is that everybody that was there agreed on the one essential thing, in that is that the status quo couldn't stand.
Right.
In Portugal, they were forced
by external parties
to change the way that they were naturally headed and would have naturally continued to head. And so that brings us back to our situation here in the U.S. is that we're spending way more than we should be. We are running ourselves now deficits equal to 7% of GDP. Our debt is actually going up at the rate of 9% of GDP because of student loan debt and other things that the government borrows money to fund that doesn't count as an expenditure.
So what you're saying is the deficit as is measured only counts part of the hole we're digging.
Right.
There's a bunch of liabilities we're creating that are not counted in the deficit, but still got to be paid off.
Right. And so what we're looking at here in the U.S. is everybody seems to agree that the deficit spending is too great. But the Democrats now are less likely to acknowledge that. Everybody used to be for getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. So when Trump comes in, he gets Elon Musk and the Doge group, and they go in and they look at every agency and they find, I think they found close to $200 billion of money that most people would say is waste, fraud, and abuse.
Well, this is in about 100 days, right?
Yes. And there's much more, and that's what we're going to cover in this podcast. Is
wasteful spending?
Yes, waste or
unproductive,
or unproductive, and that's what I want to focus on, Michael. The way that we're going to cast this, because we're going to go back to the island, and if you'll recall, on the island
in our first episode,
actually, it was the second episode,
okay.
Because we now had 10 people on the island, and all 10 of those people, at one point, we had divided the labor. And all 10 people were working. All 10 people were producing 10 units of consumable goods. So all 10 were producing a total of 100. They were all consuming 10 units, and so it was in economic balance. And at that point, but there wasn't any. They weren't building any savings. They were consuming everything that they were producing, and at that point. They were working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
So these numbers are a little arbitrary, but basically we're trying to quantify a subsistence existence.
Well, this is a little above subsistence.
A little above?
Subsistence was 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because they've divided the labor,
okay, they're
now working 12 hours a day, and they have an extra day. Okay?
Yeah.
And so then what we're saying is at that point on the island, we said one person says, well, I would like to serve as the government. I want to serve you. And so the other 9 people, if they agree to let the one person serve them, then that one person now is working full time as the government and is now not producing the 10 units. So that means the other 9 have to work 11% harder because they're now having to produce the 100 units with only 9 people.
And so in some vital sense, that work is unproductive. You're having to divide the real production by a fewer number of people.
Yeah, the question is, you've heard the expression, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yes.
So the question is for these 9 people is, am I willing to work 11% harder for the services that this person will provide as the government?
And presumably they are because they've chosen to hire him.
Yeah, they've decided to do that.
So, which is, by the way, what the United States revolutionized for the first time in the history of the world was to say, we hire the government doesn't own us.
Yes. Yeah. And
that's an upside down direction of authority.
Correct. Yes. And so at any rate, in our simple model on the island, so now let's say that one person, additional person on the island, says, I'm now 65 years old. I'd like to retire. And so now the other 8 people, if they're going to let that person retire, they now have to produce 10 additional units. And so you now have 8 people who are now producing what 10 people used to produce, which means that they're now back to working 16 hours a day, but they still have their day off.
Yeah.
Because they're having to work that much harder.
Right.
So now let's take that very simple model, and we're going to take some issues that are confronting, or some things that are going on in the United States today, and ask ourselves, have we over the last 40 years, have we increased the amount of non-productive activity? Are we paying for a bunch of non-productive work? And that's, I only use work because the people who are doing the work don't think of themselves as non-productive.
Sure.
They don't think of themselves. And so I've got a few subjects that I want to cover with you. And we have a couple of slides. Pull up the first slide on education. And this is a slide that if you'll scroll down just a bit, this is how much money we have been spending on education, and that we've highlighted here. The Census Bureau reports inflation-adjusted spending in K through 12 education has tripled. That's inflation-adjusted. Has tripled since 1970. And the amount is $751 billion. But the main point is it has tripled in inflation-adjusted dollars.
In real terms.
In real terms. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. This is the educational achievement in reading and math from 1971 to 2020. And as we can see, the reading and math scores,
it's flat as a table.
Flat as it can be, which means that we have tripled the spending in real terms and achieved nothing.
Nothing better.
Nothing better.
Yeah.
Nothing better. And so we must ask ourselves, is this non-productive spending? And I want to get to a point here because a lot of teachers will say, well, I'm working my tail off. And they are. But the tripling of the spending is not going to teachers. The tripling of the spending is going to these giant bureaucracies in education that don't do anything in the classrooms.
Yes.
And that is being driven primarily by teachers' unions. You can't possibly hire enough people in education to satisfy the teachers' unions because their business model requires more and more and more people.
Well, they're accountable to the teachers and not to the students. The union's purpose.
Well, actually, they're accountable to the bureaucrats now, not even the teachers.
Okay.
It's even worse.
All right.
What I'm saying. And then the customer, as you point out, Michael, you wanted to say something about defining a customer. We did that on the island, but in our modern world, what is a customer?
Yeah, so you and I have been involved in startups all of our lives.
Yeah.
And I ran an incubator for 15 years. And one of the first things we would do is ask the entrepreneur, who is your customer? A lot of times they didn't know. This sounds like a real simple question, doesn't it? But the person that uses your product is not necessarily the person who's paying you. We live here in Healthcare Central. A lot of private healthcare is run out of Nashville. People may not know that. But you do something for a patient, well, great, but that patient's not going to pay you a dime. An insurer is going to pay you or a hospital is going to pay you. Who is your customer? It's the payer. So the first thing to do is look at how did the money flow. The person paying you is your customer.
Yeah.
So here, the person paying for this is not the student. It's not the parent of the student. It's the government.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so consequently, the way that the entity reacts in responding to its customer is to do what the government wants done, not what the teacher wants done, not what the parent wants done, and not even what the principal of the school wants done. And therein lies not only all of the angst that we have about all these different things about wokeness and one thing or another, and I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just the sheer economics that spending has exploded, but results haven't changed at all. And so if we're going to, and just as Portugal was forced to cut spending, we're not being forced to cut spending at this point. If our economy collapses and inflation skyrockets, at that point we would be forced to do it. Right. But wouldn't it be nice if the politicians could come to terms with the problems that we have and resolve them without a catastrophe forcing them to do it?
One of the things we learned in starting businesses is that usually you step on toes. When you have a new innovation, you're displacing somebody else or you're hurting somebody else, and you will get resistance and pushback. That's part of the task of starting a business.
And we're seeing that now in politics.
You have a lot of vested interest with people who are going to lose something important to them in a change that needs to be made.
Right.
It's going to be really tough.
Yeah, it is. So now let's go to education. We're going to move from one area to another just to show the vast amount of non-productive activity or counterproductive activity in our economy and the effects of that. So the effects of the giant bloat and by the way, the same thing's true in higher education. Higher education, the cost of going, when I went to Vanderbilt, and I graduated in 1971, the cost of going to Vanderbilt was $4,300. $4,300.
And what is it now?
$90,000 is the all-in cost of attending Vanderbilt, and it might be $80,000. But I mean, my point is, it's an extraordinary amount.
Wow, so that's like 40 times as high.
Yeah, and in 50 years.
In 50 years, so in real terms, it's probably 10 or 15 times as high. After you adjust
and
for inflation.
a lot of that is colleges, universities. Once again, in many ways, especially public universities, the customer is the government.
Yes.
And in the case of Vanderbilt, a lot of the money that goes to Vanderbilt is student loans or grant money. Once again, they're having to pay attention to what the people giving them the money or funding the university. They're having to pay attention to them. And
any university that takes federal money has to follow all those rules.
Has to follow all the rules, and they have to hire all these people.
Right. There's only 2 or 3 colleges or universities in the country. I know Hillsdale College, I think Grove City in Pennsylvania, maybe 1 or 2 others who refuse to take federal government money so they can run as they want to. Right. Everybody else takes money and has to follow these rules.
And those schools that do not take government money, the tuition is much lower, because they don't have to have all of the bureaucracy. They focus on teaching, because most of their money comes from the parents. So from the customer, from the student, or the family of the student. And so now let's go to the next slide, which is regulation. Now, I found this to be absolutely fascinating. Scroll on down and keep going. And look at this right here. This is the cost. This is the cost of regulation across all businesses. That cost per employee for all business types, all federal regulations. This is per employee $12,800. $12,800.
And so the average wage for an employee in this kind of world is what?
About $55,000.
$55,000.
Yes.
So this is about between a third and a fourth.
Yeah,
around a fourth.
Yeah,
I guess
about a fourth. Yeah. And it breaks it down. And so the only place where there's going to be overlap in one of our future slides is tax compliance, which is $1,300. But notice that if you have less than 50 employees, it's even higher. It's $14,700.
Yeah.
If you have more than 100, it's $12,200, because you have more employees. The businesses are able to spread the cost.
Yeah.
But this is on all business. But scroll down to the next slide.
So just one point before we go, and that is,
go back, please.
From the point of view of an employer, if you pay somebody $55,000, you're also paying their benefits.
Yes.
Workman's comp, other taxes.
A substantial portion of their health care. Yes. And none of those are figured in here.
These are costs of regulations in addition to benefits.
Right.
In addition to salary.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so the average cost for somebody you're paying $55,000 is you add $13,068, and there's generally 20% is what we estimated for benefits and taxes and things. That'd be another 10. So you're up around what, 75, 80,000?
Yeah. Now, and I don't have this. I don't have this over time. And the point I want to make one point here is that not all regulations are bad.
Sure.
But I want to say that some regulations are,
yes, and
they are either non-productive or counterproductive.
Yes.
And it is imperative that our government is able and willing to sort out the bad regulations from the good, and to get rid of them. Yes. Because it's weighing down our economy, it's weighing down wages. But I want to mention one other thing. We have a new pope. I shouldn't say Catholic pope. That's a little redundant.
Yes.
And we have a new pope.
Yes.
And the new pope has said that wages are too low across the globe, and that socialism is bad. But every individual should have the right to join a union and bargain for higher wages. Well, let me say this. If the government is imposing tremendous costs on the business enterprise themselves, I don't care what the Pope says ought to be. Businesses only have a finite amount of money. It's called their revenue that they're getting. They can't spend more than their revenue and stay in business.
Right.
And so if you're going to continue to force businesses to pay more and spend more and more and more complying with regulations, that's less money available for profit and growth, hiring more people, or for paying your existing employees.
Well, we see this with minimum wages.
Yes.
When we raise minimum wages, there's a few people that are still employed that make more, but a lot of those people end up not being employed and replaced by a kiosk.
Yes.
Or an automation, a robot or something, because businesses have to innovate in order to keep their costs in order.
Yes, but in the case of regulations, they're not allowed to innovate. They just have to keep the wages down on all their employees in order to spend the money to comply with regulations that if the regulations weren't there, they wouldn't be spending that money.
So one of the points we made in our last podcast is these things are embedded.
Yes.
You don't pay a separate check for them. They end up being embedded in the price level. So that $4 or $2 or $8 cup of coffee you're buying includes all of this stuff.
Yes. Yeah. But it also, the cost of regulations is embedded in lower wages. It is embedded in lower wages because the businesses can't just take a $4 cup of coffee and say, I'm going to raise it to $5, because then the number of people who would buy coffee would go down.
Yes.
And so they have to manage their costs. And if government forces them to spend money on something that they otherwise wouldn't spend it on,
right,
then that's less money that they have to pay wages.
Right.
So let's go to the next one, though, because this one is absolutely mind-boggling. And this is all kind of news to me. This is now the cost of regulations per employee for manufacturing. Look at that. All federal regulations, $29,000 per employee.
Per year.
Per year.
That's half of what they're being paid.
Yeah, that's right. And this is what is driving the bureaucracy, and a lot of that money is non-productive, but a whole lot more of it, or a whole lot of it, is also counterproductive, which is even worse than non-production.
Just as an example of counterproductive, a lot of this is feeding people who are counting things, and they're sending forms to employees and teachers, fill this out so we can keep track of this and that. It goes into some office where it's filed away, maybe never acted on, but it actually drags down the efficiency, the productivity of the teacher or the employee who has to fill all that stuff out.
Exactly. The teacher is now forced to fill out a bunch of forms rather than work with students who need help. In the teaching area, in the manufacturing area, manufacturers, and by the way, what businesses, and this is not a new thing. This has been going on for 50 years. That's the whole point of what we're trying to talk about today is, let's go back to 1970. The cost of regulations has consistently gone up. The cost of bureaucracy has gone up. And what businesses have started doing in the 90s for a 20-year period was they just offshored their manufacturing. They said, if I've got to pay all this money for health care and I got to pay all this money for regulations and I've got to do this and I've got to do that, I'll just move the plant or buy from a contract manufacturer in another plant and close my factory. And Trump is trying
to close your U.S. factory and buy it from a foreign factory.
Right. And Trump is trying to reverse that.
Yes.
And I think that is, I think it's good policy to try to reverse it. But in trying to reverse it, Trump was also, in his first term, Trump said for every new regulation a bureaucrat offers, they must eliminate 2. That's what he said in his first term. Yeah. Now he's saying for every new regulation, you must eliminate 10. And that is a strong movement in the right direction. But this cost of regulation is strangling businesses and manufacturers, and it is hurting wages across the board.
And so an important corollary here is that these build up vested interests.
Yes.
You and I have started businesses. You know that any innovation you do is going to step on somebody's toes. It's going to displace what they're selling or replace it, and they don't like it.
Yeah.
So that's part of the real work of changing habits and expectations of people. It's hard.
Yeah.
The government just commands it.
Yes.
Right?
And here's what.
But there's a big constituency for keeping these bureaucracy in place.
You bet there is. There's a bunch of lawyers who send out how to comply with this new regulation, and they get paid to tell them how to comply.
Consultants.
There are a lot of consultants. There are a lot of accountants. There's all these people in the professional class that do nothing but help businesses comply with a regulation.
Yeah, I hate the word comply.
Yeah.
You know, early in my career, I said, I'm not going to take any job that has to do with any compliance. I'm going to try to make things happen and have people comply with my needs, not vice versa.
Well,
so I'm just stubborn and independent.
Yeah, and well, that's a fairly natural tendency for people who want to get things done.
Yeah.
But so in fighting the regulation, and we're seeing it right now, when you see these reports on DOGE where they uncover a lot of regulations and a lot of costs and a lot of grant money that's going out that's going to pay administrators, not researchers, they said 60% of all grant money going for research, 60% of it is for administration.
And this is by definition. This is agreement. The contract says of every grant that we get, we'll take 60% to pay for overhead, the buildings and all that we're providing for this research to take place.
Right. There was a student at Brown University who said somehow he was able to get into the database and got to 3,800 bureaucrats who work at Brown University. And he sent them an email and said, I'm having to pay $90,000 tuition to attend here. I'd like to know what you're doing with my money. And
it was like the email that Musk sent to a bunch of people. Right now, what are you doing every day?
Yeah, but Musk was allowed to do that. The student, the university and the administration attacked the student.
Oh yeah.
Rather than ask themselves, are we wasting money? Right. They didn't do that. Right. They attacked the student for pointing out that they're wasting money. So this gives you an idea of what we're up against. And what I'm hoping is that the listeners of this podcast will pass it around to other people so that other people can kind of get a sense of the battle that is going on right now, where unlike Portugal, where they were forced to do the right thing, there's nothing that is forcing our politicians to do the right thing.
And so for decades, you've seen politicians kick this can down the road.
Bingo. So regulations, what we've covered regulations, and we've seen just how expensive they can be. So let's now go to, and Mike, we've talked about this before, but it falls under this general category of non-productive work, of non-productive spending, which is not, as I said, it's not necessarily bad, but I want to point it out because this is something that can't be changed. The one thing can't be changed. Another one can be improved. So let's go to the effect of the baby boom generation.
So help me understand when you're saying what can't be changed and what can be?
Well, let's go to when we talk
what you're about to talk about?
Yes.
Okay.
Social Security is paid to people who are retired. Okay. Yeah. Now, people have paid into Social Security all their working lives.
Yes.
That's what they've done.
Right.
And if you've paid into it, that's part of your retirement.
Yes.
And so you are owed that by the government. Now, was there a better way to do it initially? I believe there was. In fact, there was an amendment offered at the time that Roosevelt passed a Social Security bill to privatize Social Security at the outset. And so a senator named Clark said this money should go into essentially an IRA in the name of the individual, so it is their money.
Yes.
And it didn't. That amendment did not pass. Yes. And so Social Security is now just merely an expenditure of the federal government.
Yeah.
But these people retirees have put money into the system, and frankly, it's their money. So politically and morally, you're not going to eliminate Social Security.
I would pick at your words and say it's not their money. It's not been put in a lockbox. It's not an account with their name on it. It is been given to the government and it has been spent.
Okay, fair enough.
It's not there.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, do you know how much you have put into Social Security over your career?
No.
I think the number for me is something around $250,000 to $400,000, something in that range.
Okay.
Okay. My wife has put in a similar amount because she was employed in a similar way.
Okay.
If you put in that $400,000 to $800,000, we over 30 or 40 years, what the stock market done, we would have $4 or $5 million.
Right, at least.
At least.
Yeah.
And so we would be more wealthy, and we wouldn't need Social Security to be paid out.
Yes, and not only that, the money that you are living on is productively employed.
Yes, it's invested in things that produce a profit.
Yes.
Government does not produce a profit.
No.
It uses part of the money and distributes what's left.
Right.
So in the future, maybe we can talk a little bit about the difference between public and private. But businesses have to take 100 and make it worth 120, or you're out of business.
Right.
Government takes 100, distributes 80. That's very simple numbers. Maybe it's 60, maybe it's 40, but they distribute a portion of what they receive.
Right.
They do not grow it.
Right. And
you're not investing your money
also,
when you give it to the government.
They also spend a lot more than they receive, and that's called the deficit. So it's your point is compounded.
Yes.
The point you're making is compounded. And so at any rate, what I'm saying is baby boomers, and I'm one of them. So I'm not disparaging baby boomers. I'm merely pointing out that our society has to pay for the living expenses for people who are now retired, and so they're no longer producing.
Yes,
and so that's an economic burden, but it's one that is it's a requirement.
Well, here's where you get people saying this is a pyramid scheme. Because the baby boomers have also paid in an enormous amount of money. They're the ones that have paid off the living expenses of prior generations, the greatest generation, all of that, okay? Good enough. Well, here, that money is gone. Here, we're retiring. We've been promised that we're going to be taken care of, and it's now being paid for by a diminishing number of people that come after the baby boomers.
Relatively diminishing number. Yeah. And now then we get to Medicare, which is for that same population. Now, unlike Social Security, Medicare, there's a tremendous amount of waste in Medicare and the way that system operates. And we've talked about that in other podcasts, in our healthcare podcast, that what we have is every single doctor visit, every single this, every single that has to be accounted for before the money is spent. And the cost of that system, just the cost, it's a lot like the grant money. 60% will go to administration, 80% will go to research. Well, in this case, in healthcare,
60 and 40.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. So in this case, you have 60% is going to the payment system and 40% is going to the healthcare providers. Well, there's better ways to do that. We've discussed that in another podcast, so we're not going to discuss it again here.
Right.
We're just pointing out that this is a burden that this burden here can be improved, not eliminated. It can be improved. All right,
to be made more efficient,
and therefore not wasting as much money, not as much money going to non-productive activity. The bean count, the people who are having to count things, because that's what the law requires.
It would be more solvent. Would be the word we use in business. If you're solvent, you have enough resources to pay off your obligations out into the future.
Yeah.
We don't have enough money now. You're insolvent. That's the definition for a business of somebody that's going to go out of business.
Right.
Government's not going to go out of business. They just got
eventually it hits the wall.
Yeah.
It hits a wall, and so the next slide that I want to pull up is not baby boomer, but it is Medicaid, and just so we have our I don't know if we can find our Medicaid. If we can't find our Medicaid slide, I tell you what, let's skip the Medicaid. Because we've talked about that in previous.
Well, the point I think we wanted to make about it is nobody paid in for Medicaid.
Nobody paid in, exactly. Okay. Medicaid is, and Medicaid, I'm not saying that we don't need to take care of lower income people with health care, but the system itself, once again, 60% of what we spend is not well spent.
Right.
40% is. And so we need to reform our entire health care system. In order to, and when I say reform it, I'm simply saying the simplest way to do it is to take the third-party payment system out of the low-cost parts of healthcare. We do that in everything else we do in life. We have car insurance, but car insurance doesn't cover the operating costs of running the car, the gas.
You don't have annual
oil
deductibles
changes,
for your car.
You don't have an annual deductible. If you have homeowners insurance, it's if your house burns down or something terrible happens. Right. But if you need a plumber, it's not insurance. If you need an electrician, it's not insurance.
Right.
If you need an HVAC replaced, not insurance. So let's go to, if we could, let's find our tax compliance slide. Here it is. Scroll down. And this shows right there, that paragraph right here in the middle. The one that says to start, the point of the tax code. So let's go to the estimate in 2024, according to two analysts at the Tax Foundation, was that Americans would spend 7.9 billion hours that year complying with the IRS filing. 7.9 billion. Now, that's not just individuals. That's also accountants and whatnot.
Right. Yeah.
And these are professionals with degrees. So let's assume that the cost is $100 an hour. $100 an hour. You take 7.9 billion, that is $790 billion that is being spent
Per year.
to comply with a very complicated and complex tax code. And if we had a simple tax code and we weren't spending the money on that, we'd be spending it on something else, or people's wages would be higher. It's impossible to exaggerate the effect on wages of all of these non-productive activities. Just like on the island, every time somebody did something, moved from being a productive person to doing something else where they weren't producing, it was a burden on the people who were producing.
Right.
It's just that simple. And this, by the way, this doesn't count the government part of then handling all the tax returns. And that's probably just as expensive.
Well, probably hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so from the point of view of an employer, we said you're paying somebody, say, an average of 55. Let's just use that benchmark number. But you're paying all these extra expenses that push it up to around 90. So let's say this were reformed and that 90 goes down to 55 plus 10, 5 or 10. You've got $30,000 per person.
Yeah.
Okay. And your point is that just doesn't go into the employer's pocket.
No.
He's got that to pay more to his employees. And if he doesn't do it, the guy down the street will do it.
Right. Or reduce the price of their product.
Yes.
Because others will reduce the price of their product.
They will compete.
They'll compete.
To use that money.
Yeah, exactly. And so our cost of compliance is for our tax system is incredibly high.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Now let's go to the lobbying. This is the lobbying expenses from 1998 to 2023. This is how much we've gone.
Billions?
Yeah,
tripled?
In billions. In billions. We've gone from 1 point. And by the way, there's another slide that I have that we may or may not get to. It doesn't matter. It's the number of lobbyists that we have. There are 12,000 lobbyists. Michael, how many of those lobbyists do you think are lobbying for less money?
For the government to spend less money?
Yeah.
Or for them to make less money?
Yeah.
In both cases, zero.
Yeah. Well, there might be a couple of foundations that are lobbying, saying, "Can't you all spend a little less money?" But it would be about maybe 1/2 of 1%.
Yeah, that's
of all of the lobbyists are lobbying for the government to reduce spending. So the pressure on members of Congress, and by the way, these lobbyists give them a lot of money for their campaigns.
Ure.
Okay?
That's how they get reelected.
That's how they get reelected. And so the amount of money that we spend on lobbying is counterproductive.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there some lobbying that is necessary to inform?
Yes.
Yes. The answer to that is yes. Is it anywhere near this? The answer to that is a resounding no. Because most of these lobbyists, because if you look at the increase in government spending from 1998, it probably has tracked ratio-wise the increase in spending on lobbyists.
Some people say we just should pass a law that outlaws lobbyists.
Well, that's a nice idea, but there is some level of information, and so what you would call the lobbyist would probably change. But the effect of it's the fact that we don't have constraints. I want to go back to our Constitution just for a bit. Our Constitution gave the federal government, and only the federal government, the power to coin money. None of the states have the power to coin their own currency. And then we also, the purpose of the Constitution at the time it was written was to empower the national government and to then limit its powers. In 1923, when Calvin Coolidge was president, total federal spending, was $3 billion. $2 billion of that, more than $2 billion, was for defense.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the growth in government since 2023, it's more than 2,000 times
bigger.
Now, Yeah,
That's
2,000.
That's in nominal terms,
That's
right?
in nominal terms. But the price of gold in 2023 was about $35 an ounce. The price of gold today, let's round it to 3,500.
Okay.
That means the real value of money
Roughly 100 times
100
less.
times the size of government, 2,000 times.
So in real terms, then, it's 20 times bigger than it was a century ago.
Yeah, than it was. Yeah, exactly. So it just kind of gives you a perspective of just how big this problem is, and how difficult it is to solve. But it's going to be undone only if the citizens support the politicians who undo it. Because politicians, if the voters vote in a big spender, guess what's going to happen? They'll get big spending.
Yes. Years ago, I was listening to a talk radio show, and a guy was complaining about some medical expense he needed, and people had opinions about whether he was justified in having it spent by the government. He says, none of their business. And I called him and I said, look, Les, remember Les? I said, Les, if I'm paying the bill, it is my business. Okay, and I feel that way about lobbyists.
Yes.
If this expense is so high, people have a right to be represented, right? The solution is not to outlaw lobbyists, it's to make the stakes of what they're doing so much lower.
Yeah.
If we didn't have the government at 25% of GDP, which is roughly where it is now, historically it's been 18 to 20, if I remember.
Yes.
Right? The the tithe in the biblical times is 10%.
Right.
Right. What is the natural burden of collective government? In ancient times, it was 10%.
10%.
Then in our times, it's been 18 to 20. Okay, that's okay. But now it's 25.
Yeah,
and that's
unsustainable.
Yeah.
And that's the part that's the unsustainable.
Yeah.
And if you try to raise taxes to achieve that, you haven't changed the wages for anybody, and you've now eliminated much of the new money to be invested to increase productivity.
And so roughly one measure of what is unproductive is things that people would not purchase if they didn't have to.
Right.
Right. People purchase lobbying services because they need them. It's important to them. And the point I'm trying to make is if we were to reduce this burden, there'd be less incentive to spend that money. We simply wouldn't have as many people hiring these lobbyists because there's not as much at stake.
That's right. Exactly. Now, by the way, we're going to have links on our website to a bunch of different resources that people can go to. So they can go to FromOurGeneration.com and they'll be able to find links. So if they want to look at this research, there's some additional slides that we're going to be putting or linking to.
Okay.
So let's go to the next one. We've done tax compliance, we've done lobbying. So I just want to mention one other one, and that is while I was over in Portugal, we had a blackout. And the entire Iberian Peninsula, the electricity went off for everything. So if you didn't have a generator, there were no lights. And so
that's Spain plus Portugal is the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes, yeah, yes. All of Spain, all of Portugal, part of southern France. Okay. So it was a big deal. Yeah. It only lasted for 10 hours, and so that's a good thing. But it did. Kathy and I played a good bit of golf in Portugal. We played with 2 people from Ireland, 2 people from Germany, 2 people from Switzerland, 2 people from Denmark, 2 people from Portugal, and 2 Americans.
That's fantastic.
And it was great fun talking to. And by the way, only the Swiss were particularly satisfied with their form of government. The rest of them, because I would like to ask them, I'd say, "What do you think about your government?" But the Swiss, they were pretty happy.
Yeah.
But at any rate, when the blackout happened, we started talking about things. And the German folks, we played with them, and Germany spends now twice as much per kilowatt as the United States does, because they've gone to green energy. They've thrown enormous amounts of money at solar, enormous amounts of money at wind.
Shut down their nuclear plants, I believe.
It's not so much what they have shut down. They've invested hundreds of billions in green energy, and green energy itself, first of all, it's very, very expensive. But it's also, the biggest problem is, and this is what we found out in the blackout, it's unreliable.
Right.
And so if you get a surge in the power, in the need for power, and the sun's not there and the wind isn't blowing, then and you're dependent on those 2 sources of energy, all kinds of terrible things happen. And so all I'm simply saying is, in Germany, what we now know, in talking with him is their cost of energy is twice our cost of energy, and at one point it was 3 times. And energy, as Trump has pointed out, energy affects everything in our economy because everything is touched by energy at one point or another.
Well, in one of the charts you had up here earlier about total regulation spending, a big portion of it was climate related.
Yes.
Okay, so all of those climate mandates are then embedded in the cost of energy, which makes everything more expensive.
Yes.
Again, we don't see this directly.
Right. And so I am for, and you and I are both for, we are both for clean air and we're both for clean water.
Well, any sensible person is.
Yes. And by the way, I did see Elon Musk say something that made headlines. He said that the sun is expanding and that the reason that he wants to make Mars inhabitable is, he says, the Earth, and this was the part that was headline, he said the sun will eventually destroy the Earth. And so that made headlines. But then his next comment was, in about 240 million years. Yeah. That didn't make the headline.
Right. Yes.
So I found that to be kind of interesting. So we have time.
Well, the job of the media is to get your attention.
That's right.
They're out of business. Again, you look at the business model, it's butts and seats. Same for theaters, which is movies.
Yeah.
You know, for internet, I get eyeballs. You remember all of that.
Yeah.
It's to get your attention or they don't have a prospering business.
Yeah. So at any rate, Michael, the purpose of today's podcast was really to talk about how much non-productive activity is embedded, or counterproductive spending and activity is embedded in our economy, which means also that there's tremendous opportunity.
Yes.
We have a tremendous problem in that we're spending 7 to 8%, whereas 2% is sustainable, 7 to 8 is not.
In the deficit.
In deficit spending.
Yes.
In deficit spending. And 2%, we can manage that. 7 to 8, we cannot. But the great news is that there is a lot of counterproductive spending or non-productive spending where we can reduce the spending and not have a bunch of negative problems that are associated with that. And,
there's a transitional problem. You know, some people thought that communism, when Marx was advocating for it, was better because people were going into these. Well, they were complaining because people were going into these factories. Okay, and it turns out that they were leaving starvation for a dirty factory.
Right.
You know, they were better off. They were choosing to do it. It wasn't great. It was, but
it was better.
It was better. And so a lot of the complaints turned out to be the transitional problems from feudalism to an industrialized world.
Yes.
We have gotten a lot cleaner since then. I remember being in a church service one time with a pastor complaining about how dirty our world is. I'm looking out the window. It's clear. The sun is coming in. The sky is blue. And I'm remembering my neighbor who said when they moved to Nashville in 1940, they had to take 3 shirts to work.
Yes.
Because there was a coal plant that would make their shirt dirty by 11 o'clock, and he would change. The windows were open.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because you didn't have air conditioning.
Well, the river caught on fire in Cleveland, I think, in the 60s or something. It was so dirty, the river caught on fire.
Yeah.
So we think we live in this awfully dirty world. There's a lot that's dirty about it, but it's way better than it was 50 years ago.
Yes, it is.
Technology will solve it probably way more effectively than regulation.
Yes, you go back decades, and coal mining was a dangerous business. The people who were in the coal mines
died.
They died. The coal mine accidents. And then black lung disease, and so many improvements have been discovered. Right. To improve the work environment, make things safer, make things healthier, and so human progress can continue, and it does continue, and that's a great thing because knowledge is cumulative.
Well, you just look at the prosperity that we have today. The lifespan is up from 50 or so to 70. I think some numbers like that.
76.
76.
I'm 76.
Well, century. Oh, we better.
We need to hurry up on it.
But things are way better, and generally it's markets that make it better. It's not regulations, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so anyway, Mike, we'll have a lot of links on the website to talk about this particular podcast on non-production. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.